All right, let's dive into a case that's really going to grab you. The murder of Cory Winnick. This guy, everybody said he was charming, generous, had maybe a little bit of a complicated love life. He was found murdered in his Iowa home way back in 1992. And get this, the case went ice cold for over 25 years. Can you believe that? Until out of nowhere, a surprise tip changed everything. We've got police interviews, court transcripts, news reports, the whole shebang. So get ready, because this deep dive is going to take us through a story of secrets, hidden motives, and a community struggling to come to grips with a truth that took, well, decades to surface.
Yeah, and you know what I find really fascinating about this whole thing? It's how the key to cracking this case came from a witness who was, get this, just a child when this murder happened. Can you imagine holding on to such a heavy secret for years and years?
So let's rewind back to 1992. Our key witness, Jessie Becker, was only 9 years old. Now, fast forward 25 years, she's an ICU nurse, right? And she just happened to be treating a police officer who's working on a totally different case. Talk about a twist of fate.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how seemingly unrelated events can just like collide, you know? This is like a textbook example of why every little piece of information, even if it seems small or unimportant at the time, can be absolutely crucial in these cold cases.
Okay, so what did Jessie remember? Well, she told investigators about being at a sleepover at a friend's house a few months after Cory's death. And she talked about sneaking downstairs with her friend and overhearing this woman, Annette Cahill, in the front room. She described it as, like, black candles lit everywhere, Annette weeping and saying over and over, "I'm so sorry, Cory. I never meant to hurt you. I loved you, Cory. I never meant to kill you. I'm so sorry for killing you, Cory."
Man, it gives me chills just thinking about a 9-year-old kid witnessing something like that. Makes you think about the lasting impact of trauma, especially on someone so young. And, you know, you also have to think about how reliable childhood memories are after so many years, right? It's a really complicated issue, and it's why investigators have to be so careful when they're dealing with these child witnesses.
Yeah, for sure. And to complicate things even further, Jessie's friend, who also happened to be Annette's niece, refused to talk about it at all. So it was a lot for Jessie to carry. Now, Jessie did tell her mom what she'd heard, but her mom, for whatever reason, never went to the police.
Imagine being in that position. You know, she was going through a tough divorce at the time, and her soon-to-be ex-husband was involved with Annette Cahill. It's like this heartbreaking situation where a mother's got to choose between protecting her daughter and potentially putting them both in danger. It must have been awful. She decided to stay quiet, a decision she later said she regretted.
So for over 2 decades, Jessie carried this burden, this secret. It wasn't until that chance encounter with the officer in the hospital that the truth finally came out. And it's amazing how these things happen. With this new information, investigators and the county attorney, Alan Ostrin, had a big decision to make. How do you approach a suspect after 25 years, especially without tipping your hand?
Yeah, it's like walking a tightrope. They knew they couldn't just confront Annette with Jessie's story right away, you know? That could scare her off and ruin any chance of getting any real information from her. They had to be smart about it.
So what was their plan? What did they do?
Well, they decided to use Annette's, previous cooperation with the investigation to their advantage. She had always maintained that she was innocent and wanted to help find Cory's killer, so they contacted her, told her they had some new developments, and wanted to chat.
So they made it seem like just a routine follow-up.
Exactly. Like nothing to worry about, just a routine check-in. And during this interview, she let something slip. She revealed that she and Cory had been planning to run away together, which totally contradicted what she had said earlier about their relationship being casual.
Interesting. So not only did they have this potential confession overheard by a child years ago, but now her story's changing. Was that enough to arrest her?
Not quite. They were still missing that one crucial piece. Hard evidence. There was nothing like directly linking Annette to the actual crime scene.
Right. That's where things get really tricky. Without DNA or fingerprints or anything like that, they had to rely on what's called circumstantial evidence. Could you explain that a little bit, for those of us who aren't lawyers?
Sure. Circumstantial evidence is basically indirect evidence, like facts and circumstances that when you put them all together, they suggest a certain conclusion. For example, the fact that Annette was at the same bar as Cory the night he was murdered, that's circumstantial evidence. It doesn't directly prove she killed him, but it does put her in the right place at the right time.
So they've got this potential confession from Jessie, a story that's changing from Annette, but no physical evidence. What happens next?
Well, her alibi becomes really important. And this is where things take another unexpected turn.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the twist?
Annette claims she was working on a roofing job the morning Cory was killed. Now, that was strange right off the bat because she wasn't a roofer.
Yeah, that does seem kind of weird. Why would she be up on a roof?
Exactly. And the other guy working on the roof, he had no idea she was even supposed to be there. He said she just showed up totally unprepared, barely did any work, and then left after about an hour, almost like she was trying too hard to be seen somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely suspicious. Did they look into this roofing job more?
Oh, they did. And it gets even weirder. After this roofing job, she claimed that she and her sister-in-law went running errands in Iowa City. But get this, she conveniently adds that they stopped by Cory's house on the way, but he didn't answer the door.
Wait a minute. So she's putting herself at the crime scene during the time the murder likely happened. It's like she's trying to create an alibi while also making sure she's part of the story.
You got it. It's starting to look very staged, very calculated.
So what did the prosecutor do? Did he have enough to charge her at this point?
Alan Ostrin, the Muscatine County attorney, he had a tough choice to make. He had this potential confession from a child, a shaky alibi from Annette, and zero physical evidence. It was a gamble, but he decided to go for it. He pressed charges.
What a difficult call. He must have really believed in Jesse's story and felt like the circumstantial evidence was strong enough to make a case.
Absolutely. But it wasn't going to be an easy win. Remember, Annette was a grandmother, well respected in her community. Convincing a jury that this seemingly sweet lady was capable of something so brutal, that was going to be a huge challenge.
I can see how public perception would make things even more complicated for the jury.
You bet. So the first trial gets underway in March 2019, 27 years after Cory's death. It was a really emotional event, with Jessie taking the stand to recount her childhood memory. Can you imagine? It must have been incredibly tough for her to relive that trauma after all those years.
It's hard to even fathom. And her mother testified too, explaining why she stayed quiet for so long. The pressure on both of them must have been immense. So what happened? What was the outcome of this first trial?
The jury deliberated for a long time, but ultimately they couldn't reach a unanimous decision. It was a hung jury. 11 jurors voted to acquit, and only one believed Annette was guilty.
Wow. That must have been a crushing blow for the prosecution, and especially for Cory's family. After waiting 27 years for justice, they were left with another agonizing wait.
It was definitely a setback. But sometimes, even the most frustrating outcomes can lead to unexpected breakthroughs.
Man, that hung jury, that had to be a huge letdown for Cory's family and the prosecution.
You bet it was a setback. But, it did give Alan Ostrin, the county attorney, a chance to kind of rethink his approach for the next trial. He figured out that he'd leaned too heavily on Jesse's testimony and needed to find some other way to connect Annette to the murder.
Yeah, I get that. After 25 years, memories can get a little hazy. And even if you've got a good eyewitness, it might not be enough to convince everyone on the jury.
Exactly. Plus, there was still that whole issue of no physical evidence linking Annette to the crime. So the prosecution team really needed something solid, something more concrete to build their case.
And is that where this second surprise witness comes in?
Yeah.
The one you mentioned before?
Bingo! Remember when we were talking about those little details and the ones that seem unimportant? Well, after that first trial, Cory's mother was talking to someone outside the courtroom, just chatting, and it came out that this person's son was kind of surprised he hadn't been called to testify. This guy, Scott Payne, he was a friend of Annette's family.
Huh. So there was another potential witness with information this whole time. What did Scott know about the case?
Well, Scott had been at the Cahill farmhouse, the day after Cory's murder, and he told investigators that he saw Annette burning clothes in a burn pit. He was sure the clothes were soaked in blood.
Okay, that's pretty significant. But how could he be so certain it was blood after all that time?
It's because of Scott's job. He worked as a sticker at a meatpacking plant, which meant his job was to bleed out pigs. So, he'd seen a lot of blood, even dried blood.
Wow. Yeah, he probably saw more blood than most people see in a lifetime. So did they decide to retry the case with this new information from Scott?
They did. And Alan Ostrin changed his strategy this time. He decided to use Annette's own words against her instead of relying so much on Jesse's testimony.
So he wanted to use her own statements, the things she had said and done during the investigation, to build a picture of her motive and how she might be involved.
Right. He focused on Annette's anger and jealousy towards Cory because of their relationship. He also pointed out all the inconsistencies in her statements and actions, how she seemed to be trying to control the story from the very beginning.
So basically he was trying to show a pattern of deception.
Exactly. And, in one of the interviews, Annette had used this phrase that became really important in the second trial. She had said, "fish or cut bait," when she was talking about how she felt about Cory being indecisive about their relationship.
Sounds like she was fed up with being strung along.
Totally. And Ellen Ostrom argued that this phrase showed her motive. He was saying that she was tired of waiting for Cory to make up his mind, so she decided to force the issue.
So he's presenting her as a woman scorned, driven to violence by this, like, obsession and rage she had.
Exactly. He argued that Annette went to Cory's house that morning to confront him, and that it just escalated, got out of control, and led to the attack. And that Fisher cut bait phrase, that was like the key to showing that Annette had reached her breaking point.
Wow, that's a pretty strong argument. So did this new strategy, along with Scott's testimony, make a difference in the second trial?
Well, there's another big twist. The jury, they deliberated for a day and a half and then sent a note to the judge saying they were stuck, deadlocked.
Oh no, another hung jury. Did the judge just call it a mistrial?
He was really close to doing that, but he decided to send the jurors home for the night and tell them to come back the next day and try again. And that's when they finally came to a verdict.
Don't leave me hanging. What was it?
After 27 years, Annette Cahill was found guilty of second-degree murder.
Wow. So after all that time, after 2 trials, Cory's family finally got some sense of justice. It must have been such an emotional roller coaster for them.
It definitely was a bittersweet victory. Obviously, nothing can bring Cory back, but at least this verdict brought some closure to a case that had hung over the community for so long.
It really shows the importance of never giving up, even when a case seems impossible to solve.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder to pay attention to all the details, no matter how small they seem. Sometimes those little pieces of information can be the key to finding the truth.
Absolutely. This whole case really makes you think about how much secrets can weigh on people and what an impact they can have on their lives. Imagine carrying a secret like Jesse did for all those years, or even Scott, knowing what he knew but not coming forward until much later.
It's true. And sometimes even doing what you think is the right thing can lead to consequences you never intended. It makes you wonder, what would you do if you were in their shoes?
You know, it's amazing to think that after 27 years, 2 trials, they finally got a resolution.
It really is. Speaks volumes about how much everyone's stuck with it, the investigators, the lawyers, and especially Cory's family. They never gave up on finding justice.
I can't imagine what they went through emotionally. I mean, first they lose their son, and then they have to go through these 2 trials with all these personal details about Cory's life being made public.
Absolutely. The impact goes way beyond just the immediate victims. It affected the whole community, forced everyone to face this dark secret that had been hidden for so long.
And even though, Annette was found guilty, there's still so many unanswered questions. It's like you've got this puzzle, and you've managed to fit most of the pieces together, but there are still a few missing. It just leaves you feeling unsettled.
I know what you mean. We know what the jury decided, but we don't know what was going on in Annette's head all those years. What was she thinking? Was she really living this double life, or did she just get caught up in something she couldn't control?
And those are questions that we may never know the answers to, which has got to be frustrating, especially for those who are looking for closure.
Yeah, it's true. It reminds us that the justice system, even though it tries to be fair and get things right, it can't always give us all the answers, especially in these really complicated cases.
It's been quite a journey going through this cold case. At first, it seemed like it might never be solved. But like we've seen, even tiny details can be incredibly important. Jesse's memory from when she was a kid, Scott seeing those clothes, burning those little bits of information, helped bring the case to a close.
Yeah, it shows how important it is to pay attention, to realize that any little detail could be crucial. And it shows how regular people, not just the police, can play a big part in solving crimes, even years later.
And we can't forget about the importance of talking to each other and how keeping secrets can really backfire. If Jessie hadn't finally shared what she knew, or if Scott hadn't mentioned seeing Annette burning those clothes, who knows? Maybe the truth would have stayed hidden forever.
What they did, speaking up even though it was probably scary, it shows how powerful that can be.
This case has really given us a lot to think about. Memory, secrets, how the justice system works, and how resilient people can be even when they face terrible tragedy.
It sure has. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage everyone to keep learning about this case and others like it. Read those news articles, check out the court documents, and decide for yourself what you think happened. And maybe most importantly, imagine you were in a similar situation. What would you do? Would you keep a secret or tell someone? It's something we all have to think about.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating case that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Until then, stay curious and remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.